Here we go. Good evening, everybody. Very special Tuesday night special guests. I'm going to ask everyone to please mute yourselves so that we can hear. We are honored to be joined by Mrs. Rebetzin Wineberg, all the way from Kansas City, and to join us here on these Tuesday evenings. So Rebetzin, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. We appreciate your lending two of your sons to help us here in Chicago. And I hope you'll have lots and lots of nachas from all of your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and all in good health. So thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. So we'll give you a little background. We started this when COVID began, and we've kept it going. And Tuesday nights, we feature some special guests. And tonight, the specialist of all guests, Rebetzin Wineberg from Kansas City. So if you would, Rebetzin, give us a little background. You've been on Shlichus for, you're a young person, but you've been on Shlichus for a while. What was it like? Can you give us like a little background when you got started? Like there was no JLI, there was no template, there was no handbook. Where did it get started? How did you get started? Can you sort of take us back and talk about those early years of Shlichus?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So I always start with tzedakah, so I'm going to go ahead and put some in. And if you have some tzedakah box in your own home, you're welcome to do the same. In answer to your question, when we came out to Kansas City in 1970, we were actually the 8th Chabad state to open. So you can imagine that it was definitely in the early years. Today, there is a Chabad house in every state of the Union. And at that time, as you had mentioned, there was no other template. There were no schools online for children, and there were no other educational resources. There was no shluchim office. So what we did is, when we came out here, the Rebbe had told us that we should be in the community. We had thought we were going out for the college campuses, but actually the Rebbe directed us and guided us to be a Chabad house of the community. And so we came into the community, and all of the colleges in the area, which did not have a Chabad house at the time, my husband and many times myself as well and our children, we would travel to them and do programs. And interestingly enough, from each of these encounters, we have today beautiful Chabad, Jewish, engaged families. Many of them have children or grandchildren who are shluchim themselves.
Oh, wow.
So it was quite the experience. And I recently spoke to someone who they are shluchim in upstate New York, beautiful, beautiful Chabad family. And her husband, his name is Rabbi Simon, was actually one of the young men who my husband met in Washington University in St. Louis. Today, they are the proud parents of 13 children.
Wow.
Mainahara, many of them on shlichus as well.
Wow. So can you talk, so you come to Kansas City. What did the Kansas City Jewish community look like in 1970? And where did you get started?
So the community in Kansas City, there was one modern Orthodox, which still exists today, one modern Orthodox synagogue, and the rest were what's called traditional, conservative, reform. All of that was available here in Kansas City. There was a school which continues to exist as well. It's called a community school, so it was not an Orthodox school. But the mandate initially was that their principal and Limudei Kodesh, the Hebrew teachers, would be Orthodox. And the Rebbe did advise us for certain reasons to send our children there. And that's where they went to school in their primary years. One of the most difficult things for us was that we did have to send them away at a very young age, because obviously we did not want them to be in that school system with mixed classes and with a lack of proper Jewish education as they got a little bit older.
We've been talking to shluchim, all around the world, in small places, big places. Can you talk to us about what it was like to have the Rebbe involved and how you had sort of direct guidance from the Rebbe in 1970, maybe in a way that was more obvious than we are accustomed to in the last 10, 15, or last 10 years of the Rebbe's physical life with us and over these years? What was the Rebbe's involvement in getting your shlichus started and in the operations?
So that's a very good question, and
I ask good questions.
we do feel very fortunate that we did have the Rebbe's guidance, absolutely. The Rebbe is actually the one that chose Kansas City for us. My husband is the director of the state of Kansas and Missouri. We actually have two states since Kansas City is a dual city. It's two cities bordering on two states. And so both the state of Kansas and the state of Missouri are under our directorship. The Rebbe definitely did direct us in terms of being a community. However, what you see today is young people going out on shlichus who are very committed to the Rebbe's mandate, which is when you come into a community, the Rebbe was there for us, but at the same time, he really wanted us to take initiative. And so when we came into the city, it was a question of what do we do first? What is it that this community needs? Considering that there were only less than 10 families that were Shomer Shabbos at the time, obviously education was going to be one of the primary things that this community needed. And that's where we started. My husband would give classes. My husband is, Baruch Hashem, very, very well learned in both Hasidus and is very articulate. And he began by giving classes. And we know that this was the Rebbe was very happy about this and had mentioned it in Yechidus to others in terms of what to do when you come into community, open up by teaching and giving classes education. I started a preschool after our third son was of preschool age. I wanted very much to be the one to educate our children in the primary years. And so I did start a preschool. And interestingly enough, the children that came to the preschool from community, from every type of family, the parents would tell us later on that this became the foundation for them of their Judaism, whether they chose to go to a Hillel later on in college. Of the children that went to our preschool, I would say 95% married Jewish. So
Wow,
talking about
that's
a
amazing.
good foundation for it, it is quite incredible. And years later, when their children were looking for where they were looking for a preschool for their children, they would come back and choose the Chabad preschool as well.
You mentioned about how today, thank God you have young families, even younger than me, lining up. They can't wait to go on shlichus to places no one ever heard of. But it wasn't like that in 1970. It was kind of a revolutionary thing for young couples to go out. Kansas might as well have been Mars in 1970 compared to Brooklyn. Can you talk about what was the process that you went through personally to decide to do what at the time was considered pretty unusual, where today, thank God, it's so much more common? How did that work for you and your husband?
Not responsible for schrijven.
Okay, let's see who's talking.
No, maybe.
Who is? Oh, there we go. Okay. We found him. Okay.
It reminds me that when we got on the plane to come to Kansas City, January 1970, I was totally shocked that the plane was full. So, coming from an East Coast mentality, it was pretty shocking.
Who else is going to Kansas City?
Anybody else was traveling to Kansas. Yeah. So yes, it was quite surprising that that the Rebbe chose Kansas City, but there are certainly reasons why he did choose Kansas City, and we do understand them a little bit better now than we did at the time. The process was that the Rebbe was very much speaking about going out on shlichus. He compared it to the Peace Corps and mentioned that John Kennedy had started the Peace Corps as an invitation to young people to go out and help promote the American ideals. And that for some reason that helped to open up for young people to do this kind of work. And so the Rebbe had spoken about this at length, and my husband and I sat down to think about what we wanted to do after we were in, my husband was in Kailul for a year in New York. And he said, would you be open to going on shlichus as the Rebbe had wanted? My husband grew up in New York, very close to the Rebbe, and it was very important to him to follow the guidance of the Rebbe. And of course, I grew up in Cleveland, where our parents were on shlichus already. They were very involved in the Cleveland Jewish community on many levels. And so to me, this was something that was very open to it. And he presented that to Rabbi Chadakov, the Rebbe's secretary, said that we are ready to go on shlichus, and we had no idea where we would end. It was like, you're ready to go on shlichus, and it's an open invitation wherever the Rebbe wants. And then we were told that the state of Missouri and Kansas were the ones that we would be going to, and we would be living in the city of Kansas City.
So you arrive in Kansas City, January 1970. Is anyone there to greet you? Is there a community that's like, Yahoo, this is what we always wanted? Like, can you take us back literally to like those first days? Like you show up in Kansas City, it's like, who are you? Or was there a welcoming party?
So we do believe in divine providence, Hashgacha Pratis.
You
Interestingly
people think
enough,
everything is Hashgacha Pratis.
Interestingly enough, prior to our coming out here, there had been an invitation and a request from a Reform rabbi for a Chabad rabbi to come and speak to his congregation.
Wow.
And so the first thing we did 2 weeks after coming to Kansas City is we actually were in the social hall, obviously, of this Reform synagogue. And it was packed to capacity. And in the corner, there was a young man standing. Obviously, they did a good PR job. And they asked different questions. I was very shy. I barely opened my mouth, but my husband did a great job speaking for us both. And yes, and from that encounter, Rabbi Levinson Alva Shalom was the rabbi there. He was a very spiritual man. And he was the one that invited Chabad. And so we did that.
So
But
the
young
Reform
man that was
rabbi
standing in the
invites
corner.
Chabad into Kansas City.
Pardon?
You're saying the Reform rabbi in Kansas City is the one who sort of gave you the entry into the community.
That was the first one. Yes, that is interesting.
Hine mate v'manoim.
I do want to say that the young man that was sitting on the side is actually a gentleman that now lives in Chicago, very, very wonderful, very much involved in the Chicago community. And he then became one of our Shabbos guests, and the rest is history.
Wow, that's amazing. So now let's fast forward 50 years. What does Chabad look like in Kansas and Missouri 50 years in?
So the process, like every process, is step by step. And as I said earlier, there were less than 10 families that were Shomer Shabbos at the time. And little by little, we were able to build up this community. Let me give you one example. So Purim, for example, in Kansas City, when we first came, was a Sunday morning carnival at Sunday school.
Even if Purim was on Tuesday.
Exactly. That was the extent of Purim. And we had a couple that was here. Actually, the family lives in New York, and some of the children are shlichus. The name is Ryder. He's an audiologist. And when they came here to Kansas City, they became very involved in Chabad activities. And they said, we really need to do something about Purim. This is absolutely ridiculous. Let's do something about Purim. And we started a Purim celebration that became a community-wide celebration with standing room only, and continued for many, many years. Today, Purim is celebrated by every synagogue on Purim Day because all their members were coming to Chabad, and they weren't very happy about that. Eventually, they got the message. And not only that, but interestingly enough, Federation, for the first time ever, did a Purim celebration, a huge Purim celebration, which was funded by some of the people that are involved with Chabad, some of the young people that are also involved in Federation. And that was for the first time ever that they did it last year. So every synagogue today does Purim, and that is really the idea of the Rebbe's vision for Chabad, that we are leaders, we start things, we raise up the community, and eventually they follow suit, and it just raises the whole community up in every aspect. Another holiday is Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer was a non-entity in Kansas City. Chabad was the only one that was doing Lag BaOmer. We have some incredible stories of Lag BaOmer with when it rained and it poured and it thunderstormed, but Chabad still did Lag BaOmer. And today, Federation and others do Lag BaOmer, Israelis do Lag BaOmer, and it's become something which has become part of this community. So slowly but surely in each aspect, in each of these holidays, we just raise the bar and eventually becomes, and then you move on. You raise the bar in other ways, but for certain things that have already been raised. Chalav Yisrael is another perfect example. There was no Chalav Yisrael in Kansas City. One of our earliest, in the early years, we actually had to go to the farm. We got our own milk. Of course, we don't compromise, so we just went, we got milk. I remember one of the ladies who, about Shua, said, "Oh, I will never, ever be able to drink Chalav Yisrael milk because you're getting it from the farm." I said, "Okay, we'll see." Today, the whole family is Chalav Yisrael. So, and it's available through the co-op, the kosher co-op, and so forth and so on. So that's just another example.
So when you got started, was it already called Chabad House? Like, was that like a known quantity in America? Now, thank God, wherever you go, people have heard of Chabad. Chabad House, I mean, it's like a brand. But what, in 1970, was that a brand? You said we were from Chabad. Did they know what that was?
So when we first started out, we were in an apartment and everything took place in the apartment. We just changed the furniture look from, from a dining room to a living room to a sitting room to a piano room to whatever it needed at the moment. And that continued until we were able to purchase our first Chabad house in Missouri. I believe that the branding of Chabad house is from the Rebbe. And from the very beginning, it was called Chabad, absolutely. And when we first purchased our first Chabad house, it was already called Chabad House, and that was in the early years. So yes, I believe.
And today, tell us what are the Chabad houses? Can you give us some numbers? What kind of Chabad houses you have in Kansas and Missouri today? We know Rabbi Tachtel. We had him on our show. We even had one of his students join us on the show from Lawrence, Kansas. But what else can you tell us in contrast to what it was like in 1970?
Well, in 1970, we were the Chabad, that is correct. And many of the young people that have come through our home are today Baalei Teshuva and have established beautiful Jewish homes. So in answer to your question about today there are, let's see, probably be in Kansas City itself, there is Chabad of the Plaza, Chabad of Lawrence, we have Chabad of Columbia, there is Chabad in Leawood, and it continues to grow. In Missouri, there is Chabad in St. Louis, and they have a number of branches there. And the rabbi in St. Louis, Rabbi Landau, actually runs the operation in St. Louis, even though it is under the directorship.
In 1970, did you ever imagine there'd be more than just one Chabad?
Absolutely not. Could not have imagined it.
It's crazy. It's, I mean, wonderfully. It's just the Kedusha that here you came, you thought, okay, if we can get established, that would be a bracha. And now, like we said, they're lining up around the corner. So Rebetzin, we want to thank you so much for your leadership, your vision, for laying the groundwork so people like me could come along 20 years later. And then Kanai Nahar, like we have two of your sons here who come along 20 years after that and are doing wonderful things to bring Yiddishkeit here in Chicago. We really appreciate it. And if somebody wants to we want to be respectful to the Rebetzin's time, but if somebody wants to jump in with a short, brief question, we'll give you that opportunity.
Any questions we're open to?
Both your sons are very nice young men. You raised two very nice young men.
I like to think I raised 9 of them that way.
Well, I only know 2 of them or so.
They're wonderful, wonderful guys doing great things. Okay, Rebetzin, we want to thank you so much for taking this time. We really appreciate it and giving us an insight. Like I've said, we've had on shluchim from the crazy places of Myanmar and Zambia and places I never even heard of. I think they made it up. And guys from these communities, but we forget. Now, thank God, there's a template, there's guidance, there's all kinds of
absolutely
marketing materials. You had to make it up from scratch, right? You didn't get a handbook.
I just want to add, if I may, I think that as we go through life, there are times when we have to reinvent ourselves, so to speak. And I felt that came about for me when all of my children grew up and they were out of the house and the preschool was taken over. We gave it over to my son and daughter-in-law. We're doing a wonderful job. And there was a point in my life where I felt like, okay, I need to find another thing to do that is going to help raise this community up. And the area that I put my energy into was actually something called Simcha Gifts, which is a wonderful program. And it's something which I hope other communities will take on. And it's just an opportunity to reach out into the community to seniors, to people in nursing homes, retirement centers, which the Rebbe very much wanted that no Jew should feel left behind, no Jew should feel lonely and uncared for. And this program has grown just incredibly to where we are giving out gifts for the holidays. For each of the major holidays, we're about 1,000 strong in terms
Wow.
of the number of gifts being given out. We've got close to 100 volunteers from across the spectrum of the community that pack and deliver these gifts. And it's something that anybody can do, even if it just means calling somebody who's a Holocaust survivor who maybe has had a loss, or who has just come home from the hospital, or somebody you hear about, someone in nursing homes, retirement center, and saying, hello, how are you? You know, what's doing? So this is a program that has the ability to be done by anybody on different levels.
Wow, you're beautiful, fantastic. Okay, we
Hi.
want to thank you. Somebody has a
Wait,
question?
I have a suggestion. So, the ARC, I'm a caregiver. Would it be really nice if you have volunteers that would just call up once a week to people that are homebound? It's a
Beautiful.
suggestion that maybe you'd want to do that.
Excellent, thank you, thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Excellent,
Very well
Okay.
said. Thank you.
beautiful, wonderful suggestions. Rebetzin, thank you for your time, thank you for your work that paved the way for the rest of us. And thank you for continuing to show that, you know, you don't retire, you don't give up, you don't say, okay, I'm done, let someone else do it, and always being innovative and creative. So really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time. We wish everyone a good night. We'll learn Mimer tomorrow night at 9 o'clock. We'll see you tomorrow night. Good night, good night. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And continued Atzlacha Rabbah to all of you.
Amen. Thank you.